The nightmare where your teeth fall out is the most common human fear, not because you fear losing your bite, but because you secretly know how fragile your facade of control truly is. This nightmare is the raw, unedited confession of your own subconscious. A dark, visceral message that you have fundamentally failed to protect yourself. We have spent centuries trying to decipher this terror, inventing flimsy psychological excuses about anxiety or repressed rage. But the true, horrifying meaning of the falling teeth paradox is this. It is the definitive dream of self-sabotage. A terrifying internal audit where you discover that the tools you rely on, your ability to speak, to consume, to defend, are rotting from the inside out, and you are the only one to blame for the decay. If you are tired of shallow, therapeutic interpretations of your deepest fears, and crave the dark, analytical truth about human nature, then you need to subscribe right now. Don't miss the next step in decoding the architecture of your own psychological collapse. The sheer tactile horror of the dream is what locks us in. It is never a clean, surgical removal. It is always a gritty, humiliating disintegration. You feel the grit of enamel and calcium in your hand, a physical manifestation of your power dissolving into useless, porous debris. Why teeth? Because teeth represent the hard, undeniable surface of the self, the instruments of aggression and the primary anchors of vanity. They are the last physical remnants of the primal human weapon, now repurposed for the modern social battlefield. Charming smiles, sharp debate, and the ability to consume what we desire. When they crumble, the unconscious mind is telling you that both your offensive capacity and your public attractiveness have simultaneously flatlined. This is the ultimate double strike against the modern ego. Think about the context in which this theme emerges. It rarely appears when we are truly fighting a physical threat. It emerges when we are paralyzed by social or professional impotence. It happens when we have been forced to swallow our words, when we are smiling through a profound, soul-crushing compromise, or when we are staring into a mirror and realizing the mask of competence we wear is starting to crack under the pressure of time. The teeth falling out is the subconscious demanding accountability. Why did you stop fighting? Why did you agree to the terms that made you feel small? Why did you let the pressure of maintaining appearances erode the foundations of your confidence until they fractured? The dream is not about fearing old age. It is about fearing the moment you realize you have been living a lie so large that your body is physically rejecting the infrastructure of your own deception. The teeth are not being knocked out by an external force. They are simply resigning, checking out, because the structural integrity of your internal resolve is zero. This is a crucial distinction. We are not victims in this scenario. We are the indifferent architects of our own dental apocalypse. We convince ourselves we are losing control, when in fact, we simply stopped exercising the control we possessed. We mistake resignation for powerlessness, and the subconscious uses the symbol of decaying bone to scream the truth back at us. The suffering inherent in the teeth dream is not derived from physical pain. It is derived from the psychological horror of absolute exposure. It is the realization that the infrastructure of deceit we built to navigate a difficult world is dissolving in real time. We suffer because we have spent our most productive years investing energy not into competence, but into the competent performance of competence. The teeth are the architectural embodiment of this performance. They are shiny, hard, and perfectly aligned, a testament to order, discipline, and high socioeconomic standing. To watch them crumble into powder or melt away like candle wax is to watch the rigorous discipline of your performed identity collapse into embarrassing messiness. What we are truly afraid of is not the loss of bone, but the catastrophic loss of status that follows. We fear becoming the one person in the meeting whose words are suddenly unintelligible because their teeth are literally spilling onto the boardroom table. This is the precise psychological moment when the self-censorship, the years of smiling politely while agreeing to intolerable terms, finally backfires. The subconscious mind, having been forced to manage an unsustainable tension between who you are and who pretend to be, demands a radical reset. And that reset begins by ripping the polite mask right off your face. If this analysis resonates with the struggle you feel to maintain authenticity in a world built on performance, consider subscribing now. It is the only way to ensure you don't miss the truth when the world insists on offering you palatable lies. We are forced to suffer this specific humiliation, the dental apocalypse, because the deepest wound is always self-inflicted. We don't experience the dream when we are fighting back, but when we are paralyzed by a specific modern neurosis, the fear of social friction. We have become pathologically conflict-averse, trading confrontation for simmering resentment, believing that the avoidance of a difficult conversation is the preservation of peace. It is not. It is merely the privatization of war. When you swallow your truth, you are actively choosing the systemic corrosion of your internal foundation over the momentary discomfort of expressing a difficult boundary. The teeth, being the symbolic instruments of taking and biting, cease to function because the self has voluntarily ceased to assert. The teeth are rejecting the jawbone because the jawbone has forgotten its purpose, which is to hold firm when pressure is applied. They fall out because they are functionally obsolete, having not been used for their essential purpose, aggressive self-assertion, in years. The dream is not predicting future trauma. It is diagnosing the current, profound spiritual rot caused by chronic self-betrayal. It's crucial to understand that this mechanism is tied directly to the ego's need for control. The dream always involves a horrifying lack of control over the decay process. You cannot stop the flow. You cannot hold them in. But this loss of control is a mirror of the control you already ceded in your waking life. You convinced yourself that silence was strategic, that compromise was maturity, and that accepting marginalization was simply the price of admission to the systems you wished to inhabit. You mistook inertia for stability. The teeth dream is the body's defiant answer to this philosophical mistake. It forces you to witness the consequence of non-action in a terrifying, tangible way. It shatters the myth of soft compromise. The message is clear. When you refuse to fight for your core integrity, your structural integrity is the first thing to go. You cannot maintain a high-resolution, complex life while simultaneously operating with a low-resolution, compromised self. The ultimate reason for the suffering, then, is the stark, undeniable confrontation with hypocrisy. We hate the teeth dream because it forces us to recognize the precise moment we stopped being the protagonist of our own lives and became a supporting character in someone else's script. We see the crumbling teeth, and we panic, desperately trying to hide the visual evidence of internal failure. But the dream makes hiding impossible. The failure is messy, constant, and inescapable. This constant psychological pressure, this willingness to dive into the uncomfortable truths of the human condition, is exactly why this channel exists. If you value this kind of deep, analytical content that refuses to offer easy answers, take a moment to subscribe and support the work. We are the architects of our own dental apocalypse because we are terrified of the responsibility inherent in being genuinely sharp. Sharpness invites friction, and in our pursuit of frictionless existence, we allow the foundational hardness of our character to soften, hoping that if we make ourselves pliable enough, the world won't break us. But the irony is merciless. The refusal to be unbreakable is precisely what guarantees our collapse. But where is the real-world evidence for this morbid psychological thesis? Look closely at the executive who has climbed the ladder not through superior competence, but through superior compromise. Observe the middle manager who once possessed a searing moral clarity, but now diligently enforces policies they know to be destructive, intellectually dishonest, or fundamentally cruel. This individual is the waking manifestation of the teeth dream. They are the walking, talking testament to structural failure. They have mastered the art of the placating professional smile, while their internal framework has disintegrated into dust. For years they convinced themselves that their obedience was a temporary tactical maneuver, a small price paid for future influence. They told themselves, "Once I reach that position of power, then I will deploy my integrity." But integrity is not a currency you save up for later. It is a muscle that atrophies instantly upon disuse. The moment they articulated a corporate lie, or remained silent when the truth was required, or signed off on a disastrous decision they privately opposed, they traded a piece of their bone structure for a temporary increase in salary or status. They sought to guarantee security by becoming soft, adaptable, and predictable, believing the system would reward their pliability. And the system does reward it, temporarily, until the inevitable structural collapse occurs. We see this collapse not as a sudden break, but as a slow, agonizing slide into professional and personal mediocrity, the dulling of the critical mind, the inability to speak concisely or powerfully, the reduction of complexity into bureaucratic jargon. Their words lose their bite because their conviction is gone. They are attempting to communicate with a mouth full of sand. The irony is excruciating. The sharpness they feared using, the conviction they abandoned, was the only thing that made them valuable in the first place. Once they become interchangeable cogs who prioritize compliance over critical thought, they have unknowingly signed their own obsolescence papers. Their ultimate tragedy is that they spent years trying to secure a future built on foundations they actively sabotaged. And when the cracks appear, when they are finally marginalized, laid off, or replaced by another hungrier sycophant, they are shocked, believing their loyalty should have exempted them from the general destruction. They mistake tenure for substance. If these deep psychological examinations of professional cowardice and the mechanics of self-sabotage resonate with you, if you are tired of the surface-level analysis that dominates most conversations, then do me a favor and subscribe. Supporting this kind of analysis is the only way to ensure we can keep digging beneath the easy answers and exposing the uncomfortable architecture of the modern mind. The refusal to be sharp is the refusal to accept the existential friction necessary for growth. True growth is painful. It requires grinding against the assumptions of the mediocre world. It demands that you accept the risk of being wrong, the risk of being disliked, and the certainty of being misunderstood. The compromised person, The person haunted by the teeth dream is addicted to the smooth surface of immediate agreement. They want their ideas to slide effortlessly into the existing narrative, which requires filing down every challenging angle until the concept is smooth, predictable, and ultimately meaningless. They prefer the illusion of harmony over the reality of necessary conflict. The philosophical teeth dream is therefore a warning against intellectual disarmament. It is the subconscious mind screaming that you have surrendered your primary weapon, the ability to articulate, to distinguish, to cut through the noise, and to chew on hard truths. When your teeth crumble, you are reduced to consuming only soft, pre-digested material, the mush of consensus, the gruel of corporate messaging, the pap of accepted dogma. You become incapable of ingesting anything of nutritional complexity, and your mind, starved of challenge, begins to wither. This explains the pervasive cultural ennui, the widespread feeling of being underfed, despite being surrounded by unprecedented informational abundance. We have lost the teeth required to process the feast. The cultural demand for softness is the most insidious lie currently being peddled in the name of progress. We are taught that the highest moral virtue is to ensure that no one is ever intellectually inconvenienced, that the goal of conversation is not truth or clarity, but universal affirmation and emotional safety. This is the intellectual equivalent of institutionalizing malnourishment. When you are constantly protecting yourself and others from friction, you are not fostering empathy. You are cultivating an extreme, almost pathological fragility. The compromised person, already suffering from the teeth dream, eagerly embraces this societal lie, mistaking their own cowardice for moral superiority. They use the language of safety to mandate the very softness that destroys the mind's ability to process complexity. They claim to be building a more inclusive space, but they are actually building an intellectual padded cell where any idea that resists immediate, easy categorization is labeled as violence and swiftly expelled. They refuse to understand that the concept of an idea that is dangerous to an existing structure is the historical precondition for every single instance of intellectual and moral advancement humanity has ever made. Every truth that mattered was first perceived as a hostile aggression against the comfortable lie it replaced. When the teeth are dulled, the palate becomes exquisitely sensitive to pain, and the simplest truth feels like an intolerable insult. This is the real pandemic of our era, a widespread allergy to reality, weaponized by those who benefit most from the soft, pre-digested consensus. If this level of unvarnished scrutiny, this refusal to wrap hard truths in sentimental gauze, is something you value, if you believe that the path to wisdom requires the willingness to offend and be offended by ideas, then please stop scrolling for a moment and hit that subscribe button. It ensures that analyses this deep, this willing to challenge the prevailing script, can continue to find a platform and reach people who are genuinely searching for intellectual nourishment, not just comfort. The ultimate betrayal of the teeth dream is the complete loss of the capacity to discriminate. To discriminate, in its highest philosophical sense, simply means to perceive distinctions accurately, to separate the wheat from the chaff, the true from the false, the necessary nuance from the distracting noise. It is the core function of the intellect. The dull, smooth mind cannot discriminate. It sees only a blurry, uniform landscape of things that are nice and things that are mean. This failure of discrimination is why we are drowning in information, but starving for insight. The person obsessed with maintaining consensus cannot distinguish between a necessary ethical conflict and a petty argument. They just perceive all friction as inherently bad. They have surrendered the sharp edge required to make moral cuts, and without the ability to cut, to separate, and to judge, all moral systems collapse into a formless, ethical sludge. We're left with a culture that champions sentiment over rigor, feeling over fact, and immediate emotional gratification over the arduous, painful process of seeking objective truth. The person whose teeth have crumbled is destined to live a life not of peace, but of profound intellectual stasis, forever confined to consuming the soft pabulum of their own carefully curated delusion. The tragedy is not merely that they refuse to grow, but that they then actively mandate the same debilitating diet for everyone else, ensuring that the necessary conflict that fuels societal evolution is perpetually sabotaged in the name of a fragile, counterfeit harmony. But the true tragedy is that this avoidance of discrimination is not born of peace. It is born of profound suffering, the suffering of the oversensitized ego. The modern mind has catastrophically failed to separate the idea from the self. An intellectual challenge, a philosophical distinction, or a necessary moral critique is no longer perceived as a tool for refinement. It is registered instantaneously as a direct, physical threat to the person's psychological safety and social standing. The ego, fundamentally terrified of being wrong and terrified of being alone, dictates the terms of engagement. It demands that the environment reflect back a unified, approving image of itself, and any idea that complicates that reflection must be destroyed, not debated. This is why complex ideas are immediately reduced to moral binaries. If you discriminate, if you judge a concept or a behavior as inferior or destructive, you are immediately accused of being a discriminatory, judgmental person. The mechanism is insidious. By conflating the critique of a policy or a belief system with a character assassination, the soft mind avoids the rigorous work of actual thought, and instead employs the effortless defense of moral indignation. They mistake being agreeable for being good, and they weaponize kindness to enforce intellectual cowardice. This surrender is a form of self-medication, a narcotic comfort traded for the crushing anxiety of uncertainty. Uncertainty requires continuous engagement, constant reevaluation, and the sharp teeth to chew through competing truths. The person whose teeth have softened prefers the smooth, predictable rush of belonging to a tribe whose moral axioms are pre-chewed and easily swallowed. They believe they are seeking ethical purity, but what they are actually seeking is the cessation of existential discomfort. This is precisely the type of psychological architecture that requires excavation, not just surface-level diagnosis. If you recognize the difference between mere complaining about the state of the world and the deep surgical analysis required to identify the architectural failures of the modern mind, if you find value in understanding the blueprints of intellectual resistance, then subscribing now is the clearest vote you can cast for this kind of rigorous, unapologetic thinking. It's how we ensure that these discussions about the fundamental psychological weaknesses crippling our capacity for true wisdom continue to be supported. The failure to discriminate ultimately robs the individual of the only thing that could ever grant them true autonomy: self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is the ultimate act of discrimination. It requires one to ruthlessly separate the authentic, useful parts of the self from the adopted shadows, the projected anxieties,
and the performative virtues adopted solely to appease the collective.
The person who fears judgment, even the judgment of an accurate idea, will never dare to judge their own soul, and so they remain a stranger to themselves, a hollow echo chamber reflecting the loudest noise of the surrounding culture. Their moral life is reduced to public performance, a constant demonstration of acceptability rather than a painful internal striving toward integrity. The tragedy culminates in the fact that they are perpetually exhausted, mistaking the fatigue of maintaining 1,000 external masks for the genuine effort of profound self-mastery. They are not at peace. They are merely paralyzed by the sheer weight of their own undigested, unexamined existence. This paralysis is not an abstraction. It is the operational failure of the modern psyche, visible every time a minor intellectual lapse triggers a ritualized purification. Look at the real-world consequence of this fear of judgment, the environment where nuance is treated as betrayal. Consider the contemporary spectacle of the public intellectual, the self-proclaimed ally, who sacrifices years of nuanced analysis for a single, immediate performance of ideological compliance when the collective spotlight shines on an offending topic. This person, obsessed with maintaining the appearance of moral hygiene, will routinely denounce the smallest misstep in others, not out of genuine commitment to the stated principle, but because participation in the denunciation is the cheapest, most effective way to purchase temporary immunity for themselves. They are projecting their internal anxiety onto the target, hoping that by burning the effigy of error publicly, they will distract the crowd from the deep, complex, and inevitable errors lurking in their own unexamined belief system. Their public life becomes a ceaseless demonstration of ethical sterility, where the intellectual mission is no longer to find truth, but to avoid being caught in possession of a dirty thought. This is the brutal irony. In their desperate effort to be judged worthy by others, they completely surrender the right to judge their own thoughts critically, because if they permitted rigorous self-scrutiny, they might discover a flaw that the mob could exploit. The psychological cost is devastating. The individual stops thinking for real. Their mind becomes an internal editing room where every idea is vetted not for accuracy or utility, but for its potential liability in the court of public opinion. They are effectively performing intellectual sterilization on themselves, preemptively amputating any complex or paradoxical thought that might require difficult, discriminatory language to articulate. They are perpetually exhausting themselves not by doing the work of true integrity, which is quiet, solitary, and self-directed, but by endlessly maintaining the performance of faultlessness required by their external audience. The true tragedy is that the capacity for meaningful moral action, the capacity to identify and resist actual systemic evil, atrophies completely. When all intellectual error is treated as moral crime, the individual becomes incapable of distinguishing between a clumsy statement and genuine malice. They lose the ability to discriminate between a flawed ally and an actual enemy, reserving all their finite energy for policing the grammar of the acceptable rather than confronting the architects of systemic suffering. They substitute the cheap thrill of moral outrage for the painful discipline of moral substance. To break this debilitating loop, one must first recognize that the fear of being judged imperfect is the primary enemy of self-mastery. The moment you are more afraid of external error than internal ignorance, you have sold your autonomy. You must be willing to entertain the possibility that your most cherished virtues are merely adopted habits
designed to gain tribal access.
This is the deepest form of philosophical resistance. And if this uncompromising demand for clarity resonates with your own struggle against intellectual conformity, if you believe that the most vital act is the internal surgery required to see yourself truly, then consider supporting this channel by joining our community. It is only through building a refuge for unapologetic analysis that we can begin to reconstruct the intellectual foundations necessary for genuine wisdom. The true measure of an autonomous mind is not how many mistakes it avoids, but how quickly and ruthlessly it is willing to identify and discard the mistakes it already made, regardless of the social cost. The person who refuses to discriminate against their own poorly formed ideas is a philosophical infant. They cannot be trusted with moral leadership because they have not yet learned how to lead themselves. The final, brutal verdict on this age of performative morality is this: the pursuit of external purity is spiritual vanity, and the demand for perfection is the most efficient engine of intellectual and moral cowardice ever devised. When your highest value is the avoidance of being wrong in public, you have fundamentally surrendered the capacity to be right in private. You have traded the profound difficulty of becoming a responsible actor for the immediate dopamine hit of being perceived as a good person. The only ethical stance that survives contact with reality is the radical commitment to imperfection, the willingness to make necessary, high-stakes moral decisions, knowing you will inevitably fail, but dedicating yourself to brutal, internal correction rather than public appeasement. We must accept that true moral responsibility is not about maintaining a spotless resume for the tribunal of public opinion, but about accumulating the hard-earned scars of necessary conflict. If you want to know what a soul that has succumbed to the fear of judgment looks like, look no further than the individual who can only critique the past but lacks the courage to act decisively in the present. They are historians of virtue, incapable of being architects of it. They mistake the safety of the spectator box for the discipline of the arena. Your worth is not a consensus, and your moral health is not measured by the depth of your social acceptance. We are living in a time where people fear the consequences of truth more than they fear the malignancy of the lie. And that paralyzing fear is the single greatest intellectual drain on human potential. The greatest philosophical act you can perform today is to make peace with the fact that you will be misunderstood, perhaps hated, for the clarity of your vision. Stop trying to negotiate with the fear of inadequacy. Embrace the necessary risk of being wrong in the eyes of the crowd, so that you may finally begin the excruciating, vital work of being right in the silence of your own mind. It requires an uncompromising solitude, a commitment to internal exile from the noise. And if you understand that intellectual survival depends on this kind of harsh self-assessment, if you are ready to join a genuine community dedicated not to comfort, but to truth, and the difficult, necessary reconstruction of the autonomous self, then subscribe now. We are building the intellectual refuge required to withstand the rising tide of manufactured outrage. The true horror is not falling short, but never trying to clear the bar at all. You must stop waiting for history to validate your character. You are living it right now, in the desperate silence between deciding and acting. The greatest sacrifice you will make for your own integrity is the sacrifice of your reputation. Let the shallow minds categorize you. Let the cowards judge your necessary actions from the safe distance of their inactivity. Their judgment is merely the hollow echo of their own unmanifested potential. The final and terrifying truth is this: the only person you are fundamentally obligated to answer to is the version of you that will exist 5 years from now, looking back at the compromises made today. Will that future self regard you with honor for the conflicts you engaged in, or with silent disgust for the safety you prioritized? The measure of your existence is the degree to which you chose action over safety, conflict over compliance, and self-possession over popular approval. Moral clarity is profoundly expensive, and if you are not currently paying a steep price for your beliefs, social isolation, professional friction, or genuine misunderstanding, you are not thinking clearly enough, or you are not acting at all. The choice is stark, inescapable, and already upon you. Be the one who failed attempting the necessary, or be the one who succeeded brilliantly at doing nothing consequential. There is no sustainable middle ground, only the active struggle towards autonomy or the passive decay into irrelevance. We cannot afford the luxury of inaction any longer. If you have listened this far, you know the stakes. And if you are ready to stop consuming the noise and start creating the deep, focused signal required for true philosophical warfare, then prove it. Join the community, subscribe, and let us get back to the work that truly matters. The final verdict is this: the most profound and unforgivable act of self-betrayal is choosing the manageable pain of slow decay over the necessary, sharp agony of growth. The greatest myth of our modern age is that we can outsource our moral identity to consensus and remain whole. You cannot. The universe will not punish you for the audacity of your ambition. It will simply forget you for your timidity. The choice, always, is between the heavy armor of autonomy, which guarantees loneliness and conflict, or the lightweight shackles of compliance, which guarantees oblivion. Do not wait for a perfect moment of clarity. The perfect moment is the one you seize by force. You must operate on the assumption that you are right until proven catastrophically wrong, because the only thing worse than being wrong is being passively insignificant. The reward for this brutal self-honesty is not comfort or external validation. It is the profound, unshakable silence of a clear conscience that stares down fear and chooses the necessary path anyway. This is the true meaning of philosophy, not the passive study of truth, but the living enactment of it, day after relentless day. If you have listened this far, you know the stakes. And if you are ready to stop consuming the noise and start creating the deep, focused signal required for true philosophical warfare, then prove it. Join the community, subscribe, and let us get back to the work that truly matters. The time for observation is over.